The fungi, commonly called orks, goblins, gnomes, and trolls, the fungi form the foundation of mythological ecosystems. They start off as very small, magical decomposing organisms. The very first stage of the fungi is spores, which which takes the form of chemotrophs, landing in inorganic material as a source of food. At this stage, the fungi begins to build coral-like structures as they consume the surrounding inorganic material. To be clear, a distinction must be made between the chemical process and the mythical process when it comes to the fungi or the fungi. The fungi metabolizes magical reactions, whereas the fungi metabolizes magical reactions, whereas the fungi metabolizes chemical reactions. This forms the foundation of magic-based ecosystems. After the foundation of the fungi coral, the second stage occurs where the fungi becomes more complex, possessing a magical metabolism. The fungi reproduce the fungi reproduction becomes more complex as as its metabolism grows more demanding with their regeneration. If there is enough magical energy within the ecosystem to support the growing metabolism, then it transforms. If there is not enough magical energy within the ecosystem to support the growing metabolism of the fungi coral, then it does not transform. This lack of transformation becomes the foundation of the inorganic ecosystem, giving rise to trolls and gnomes. When there is enough magical energy, the fungi becomes more complex and evolves from spores of inorganic material to spores of organic material, forming the foundation of orks and goblins. This forms the foundation of shrooms. These shrooms are far more complex, comprised consuming the nutrients of any decaying mystical organic material. Once enough energy is stored, the shrooms reproduce, releasing animal cells. These cells take two forms, worms and slugs. Both start off small, feeding on the shrooms and other mythical organic material, slowly growing larger and more complex. Both species will evolve into both orks and goblins. However, the worms are more likely to become larger orks and the slugs are more likely to become smaller goblins. Before this can before this can occur, they must grow teeth. Their teeth evolve based on their environment and diet. If they consume a lot of meat, they will be carnivorous. If they consume a lot of plant matter, they will become herbivores. And if their diet is more or less balanced, they will become omnivores. Orcs are more likely to become carnivores, and goblins are more likely to be herbivores, but it is not exclusive. Omnivores can go either way, becoming orcs or goblins, but omnivores are almost always the smallest and more intelligent of both members of the species. Omnivores can grow much faster, but typically the diet of both meat and plant seems to lean itself toward higher intelligence. In the context of orcs and goblins, another factor of diet is the less food an orc or goblin eats, the more magical energy it tries to metabolize. As a result, magical orcs and goblins typically eat the least amount of food compared to other orcs and goblins. In the term of physiology and mentality, the growth of an orc and goblin is controlled by two factors, big and dumb or small and cunning, with average size being a relative term within a society. Nomadic orcs and trolls are common and almost always are big and intelligent, and fending for oneself in the wild makes one very wise. The coral reef. The fungi coral is the fungi coral in context is an organic compound with little to no magical energy left in its environment to be metabolized. But with even less magical energy in the overall environment, the fungi adapts and converts from organic metabolism to a much slower, more energy efficient inorganic metabolism. This new metabolism allows the fungi to convert the existing coral and the inorganic material with the environment into crystalline structures. So the fungi evolves to consume itself as it transmutes its reproduction and metabolism into a much more simplistic form. The organic fungi coral reef is replaced with an inorganic coral reef. After this adaptation, the metabolism once again attempts to support attempts to become stronger and more demanding. If there's enough inorganic material in the environment to support the growing metabolism needs of the coral reef, this formed the foundation for trolls and gnomes. Trolls and gnomes are organic looking beings that feed off inorganic materials, primarily minerals and ores. Some gases can form minerals, and while trolls and gnomes can consume these materials, they are likely they are likened to herbivores eating plants and carnivores eating meat. The coral reefs form the foundation of mythological ecosystems. They start off as a very small, magical decomposing organism. The very first stage of the fungi is spores, which takes the form of a chemotroph, landing in inorganic material as its source of food. At this stage, the fungi begin to build coral-like structures as they consume the surrounding inorganic material. To be clear, a distinction must be made between the chemical process and the mythical process when it comes to the fungi versus the fungi. The fungi metabolizes magical reactions, whereas the fungi metabolizes chemical reactions. This forms the foundation of a magical based ecosystem. After the foundation of fungi coral, the second stage occurs where the fungi becomes more complex, possessing a magical metabolism. The fungi reproduction becomes more complex as its metabolism grows more demanding with every generation. If there is enough magical energy within the ecosystem to support the growing metabolism, then it transforms. If there is not enough magical energy within the ecosystem to support the growing metabolism of the fungi coral, then it does not transform. This lack of transformation becomes the foundation for trolls and gnomes, laying the foundation for the inorganic ecosystem. Trolls and gnomes come into being in the exact same way that orcs and goblins do. However, the orcs and goblins can be viewed as being organic creatures feeding on organic life, whereas gnomes and trolls should be seen as non-organic life feeding on mineral-based life. The coral reef of the orcs and gnome ecosystem gives rise to the fungi and forms the primary food source for the orcs and goblins. With regards to the trolls and gnomes, their organic coral reef gives rise to the inorganic mineral-based coral reefs of the trolls and gnome mineral-based ecosystem. This gives rise to the crystals, which is synonymous to the shrooms for forming the foundation of trolls and gnomes ecosystem. The crystals are the decomposers of inorganic material, feeding exclusively on non-gaseous compounds found in the environment. The fungi overall are a highly primitive, warlike species of barbarians and raiders that occupy much of the eastern hemisphere of the power-wisdom encouraged world. The term fungi is a common collective description used by many civilized nations to refer to the forces of orcs, goblins, gnomes, and trolls, and their biological related members of their species. The broadest division is between the orcs and goblins and the trolls and gnomes. The fungi are considered by many to be the scourge of all civilizations. These tribal warriors are violent in their tendencies, raiding ceaselessly, carrying war and barbarians to all corners of the known world. Time and time again, hordes of fungi would arise without warning and lay a great swath of destruction that has no direction or purpose other than simple violence. Indeed, the fungi species' single motive is violence, an ever increasing mass of warfare that has the potential to dominate and cover the entire world in a seething greenish brown tide. However, the fungi tendency for warfare has created a division within their own society that has ensured their species shall never reach such heights. Since the dawn of their history, the fungi have been plagued by a never-ending series of strife and civil war that has consumed millions of their own kind. Such is their tendency for warfare that tribes have been known to fight each other just as much as they fight the other civilized species of the power wisdom encouraged world. Though such a disunion would often spell the doom of their species, such are the fungi's adaptabilities to both survive and thrive in the most harshest of environments, that the fungi can never truly be exterminated from the face of this world. Without the proper knowledge or unity to progress past even the most basic foundation for a civilization, the fungi cannot amount to anything better than primitive savages living within scattered tribal societies. The fungi species arrived in the world at some unknown point in the world's prehistory. The most likely explanation are that their insidious spores were either mistakenly introduced to the world by the Alpha Draconans or that they drifted through space and arrived in the world by some other means. Ever since then, the fungi has spread to become an ever present and belligerent enemy of the other species. So primitive and backwater were the fungi during the early years of their existence that the only sensible record of the history will always be kept by the various nations that they attacked and conquered. The first known records of their existence was written and kept by the dwarves during the golden age of their people, around the time of the horrific during the time of the horrific catastrophe known by their species as the times of woe. The fungi primarily reproduce by releasing egg and sperm into the air and or the fungi primarily reproduce by releasing egg and sperm into the air and or water until around age 70. The fungi are androgynous. While androgynous, rather orc or goblin or troll and gnome, their body releases egg and sperm. These eggs and sperm produce coral, respectively. As mentioned before, the fertilized eggs produce mycelium, and from the mycelium a mushroom will form. These mushrooms release egg and sperm that, when fertilized, start the second stage of germination, the foundation of the worms and slugs. The worms and slugs start off as simple shoots attached to any surface of sufficient stability. They grow as a maw. The body has many segments. Each segment is a developing worm. The segments at the very tip will fall off once it reaches maturity. This occurs at the microscopic scale. It takes a very long time for the fungi to reach maturity. Starting microscopic and growing up to be macroscopic, the worms and slugs grow up to become squigs. Squigs are a mouth, teeth, legs, and a stomach. It can be argued if they have a brain, as they have the most basic of intelligence. In time, squigs will pupate and transform into snarklings. Snarklings are the intermediate between the orcs and trolls and goblins and gnomes. Environmental factors will determine if the snotlings will become larger, dumber orcs or trolls, or the smaller, smarter goblins and gnomes. Condition fac- conditions favor smaller and smarter, as the survival of the snotlings depend upon this, even though orcs are rarely ever selected by nature to be anything other than simple-minded. From the snotlings the Gretchen is born. The Gretchens come into two categories: Alpha Gretchen and Beta Gretchen. First, it must be made clear that the Gretchen is a subspecies of the fungi higher intelligent members, so to speak. The Alpha Gretchens are to orcs and goblins, trolls and gnomes as primates are to hominids, but unlike hominids, certain environmental cues activate dormant genes in the Gretchens that allow them to mutate into their more evolved forms. The Alpha Gretchens evolve into the larger orcs and trolls, and the Beta Gretchens evolve into the smaller goblins and gnomes. Lastly, we reach the most common and iconic stage of the evolution of the fungi, the orcs, goblins, trolls, and gnomes, which mentally adolescent. This is the teenage stage of the fungi. Maturity will vary, but a total of 70 years is required to reach sexual maturity. The fungi start the stage of their life androgynous and without genitalia, continuously releasing eggs and sperm into their environment. There are in fact female orcs, goblins, trolls, and gnomes. Sexual reproduction can occur once members of the species live over 70 years, as that is how long it takes gender to mature. As such, members of the fungi society are predominantly androgynous. It can be argued that an orc is an adolescent for the first 70 years of their life, and become a teenager at its 70th birthday. The fungi are long-lived, and if they evolve to be photosynthesizing, they are almost immortal. Social maturity Social maturity fungi with members over the age of 70, which have developed gender, tend to reproduce sexually. The environment of adolescent societies of members of the fungi is hostile at best, so gender maturity typically causes them to go rogue and leave their adolescent tribes. At this point, the orcs, goblins, trolls, and gnomes move into a Stone Age mentality and focus on agriculture. However, Like all societies, adolescent members of the fungi, being exclusively nomadic, are a threat to these newly formed cultural fungi societies, and it becomes necessary for the elder members to go to war with the adolescent fungi tribe war bosses. Granted, the basic Granted, the basic hierarchical structure of the fungi still exists even after gender is formed. The biggest, smartest fungi males and females become kings and queens, with the adolescent fungi war bands forming hunter-gatherer presence hunter-gatherer present tribes around their fungi city-states. Gorka is the primary deity. Gorka is the primary deity of clobbering, smashing, breaking, killing, and pummeling the rest of the world into submission. This is a notion that resonates strongly with the more warlike and highly violent orcs subspecies, where their single-mindedness for violence and brutality often outshadows their otherwise low cunning. Morka is the Patreon deity of gall, cunning, and intimidation, whereas Gorka is more likely to copper an enemy god in the face. Morka will happily wait until the enemy's back is turned before belting him around the back of the head. It's Morka who is revered by the strangers and arguably is it's Morka who is revered by the strangers and arguably more intelligent strand of fungi, the most predominant of which are the goblins, the twin deity as viewed by the trolls and the gnomes. Morka is the primary deity of clobbering, smashing, breaking, killing, and pummeling the rest of the world into submission. This is a notion that resonates strongly with the more warlike and highly violent troll subspecies, whereas a single-mindedness for violence and brutality often outshadows their own wise low cunning. Gorka is the patriarch deity of gall, cunning, and intimidation, whereas Gorka is most likely to clobber an enemy god in the face. Morka will happily wait until the enemy's back is turned before belting him around the back of the head. It's Morka who is more revered by the stranger and arguably more intelligent strand of fungi, the most predominant of which are the goblins. Gorka and Morka are the gods of the fungi species. Each one represents two of the most defining characteristics of orcs, goblins, gnomes, and trolls. Similar to the other sentient species of the Power with Encouraged world, the fungi seem to believe and have created a different pairing of gods that usually embody the species' basic instincts and emotions. As these emotions begin to manifest within the realm of the incorporeal, they form two twin deities which inherently every fungi would instantly recognize as Gorka and Morka. These two these twin gods of war embody hyperarousal, better known universally as the fight and fright response. The single most important thing to the fungi is fighting and surviving, while orcs and goblins are of a cognition that does not embody or focus on surviving. Gnomes and trolls are. Apart from physiological differences, this core characteristic is what predominantly sets the two apart. Whereas in the Ork and Goblin's use of words, Gorka is brutally cunning, while Morka is cunningly brutal, the Gnomes and Trolls, on the other hand, say Gorka is cunningly brutal and Morka is brutally cunning. Technically speaking, the troll environment is predominantly close quartered. As much as trolls believe in force of aggression, that is to say that everything is done with maximum effort with lethal intent. This also applies to the initial engagement. The biggest difference between orcs and goblins and trolls is that orcs and goblins rarely fight in truly close quartered combat, and trolls and gnomes rarely fight out in the open. For the troll and the gnome, for the troll and the gnome, there is a natural intimidation. There is a natural intimacy to use their environment to gain maximum advantage over their enemy, and as such, trolls and gnomes have taken on the stigma of being orcish cowards. Their tactics rely heavily on falling back and regrouping, and trolls are much more disciplined marksmen and sharpshooters, evolving a much higher degree of dexterity and finesse over their orcish and goblin counterparts. They are also far more patient and slow to engage their targets, relying on terrorism, stealth tactics, and planning. Trolls have been known to evade and plan their attacks out for so long that the enemies are frightened away, leaving before even beginning the engagement. But this is not to say that gnomes and trolls are fearful or overly cautious. It's simply a matter of preference. Compared to the orcs and goblins, trolls would appear to be more cowardice, but their actions are a byproduct of far less aggression and much more intelligence compared to that of the orcs and goblins. To put it simply, Gorka is the embodiment of overwhelming brutality in close quarter combat, whilst the twin Mocha embodies gall, cunning, intimidation, and the use of the unconventional tactics of warfare. As these distinctions can be readily seen between orcs and goblins, gnomes, and trolls, it is very common for orcs to worship Gorka's brutality over Morka's cunning, just as much as goblins prefer Morka's cunning over Gorka's brutality. In kind, trolls tend to worship Morka's brutality, however more however most fungi can never understand the difference and at times consider the twin gods as one of the same. Nevertheless, these twin gods of war are always ready are always readily worshipped by all fungi in almost equal measure, with many shamans having the ability to interpret the twins' wishes and demands. Often these messages are one of war, with many tribes following the shaman's instinctive instructions of going to a particular location where other tribes shall gather and form into a wog. The primordial god Gorka Morka. Orcs, goblins, trolls, and gnomes are all kingdom fungi. However, they have a very distinct social and cultural difference between them. The two members are mutually neutrally viewing each other with an instinctual primordial kind of respect. However, they are divided on one thing, religion. They are unable to agree on the attributes and characteristics of their twin gods. It has been recorded that during a great catastrophe, the two different subspecies were surrounded by hostile enemies, living in close quarters. Over a long period of time, and through some kind of cultural exchange, the fungi god of Gorka Morka was formed. It was written that the two twin gods had died, defeated during their last battle with each other, after becoming overwhelmed by the other gods, while in their weakened state. Upon their death, their remains decayed into a pool of blood and bile, which in turn formed a giant crystalline mountain, onto of which grew a giant fungi. The mountain top was covered in white mushrooms instead of snow. Orcs and goblins poured off the mountain tops, and trolls and gnomes poured from underneath the mountain to avenge the death of the gods. This new mountain was named Gorka Morka and was a physical manifestation of the fungi twin god.